Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. Tonight, we are welcoming Maya Prasad and Susan Azim Boyer. They are both YA and Maya also writes middle grade authors, and we're excited to talk to them for the second time. We got to talk to them a few months back when their first novels and first YA novels came out, and they have just had their second novels come out for YA. We've got them both in the store. So if you decide after the interview you want either one of them, they are sitting there just waiting for you to take home with you. So I'm just gonna start. I'll start with Susan this time. If you could just talk about the book that most recently came out, just talk about maybe a little bit about the synopsis, a little bit about what it's about without giving anything away.
Thank you, Christy. So my second young adult novel is called The Search for Us, and it's a YA contemporary about a brother and sister who've never met. They are DNA matched, and they join together to find the father they never knew. And he's an Iranian immigrant and a U.S. Army veteran. All they know about him, they each have his military portrait, and that's it. And this book is inspired by my husband, who happened to have no connection to his biological father, and to our surprise, was DNA matched with a sister he had never known. And their relationship fascinated me, and because they're like siblings and strangers, and especially their search for their father. So the search for us. It's not a romance.
Yeah. No, it isn't.
That's Henry and Samira, their brother and sister. The DNA strand is in the back. I don't know.
Yes, they did a really good job with the cover on that. I really like actually both of your books. The covers were really great.
Thank you.
And then if you could just talk a little bit too about the first book that came out, because I think probably a lot of people who are watching this interview won't necessarily have seen our previous interview. So if you could talk about that one too, that would be lovely.
So my debut novel was Jasmine Zumide Needs a Win, and it's kind of a likely satirical look at what happens when an international incident crashes into a high school election. It's a historical young adult novel. It's set in 1979. It's really more the 80s. 1979 had an 80s vibe. And it's really about Jasmine kind of reckoning with her embarrassment at being Iranian. It's weird. The language is weird. The food is weird. The culture is weird. That's the message, the narrative that she's been getting. And this election kind of thrusts her into the limelight. And like I said, where Jasmine Zumide is lightly satirical and historical, The Search for Us is very emotional and contemporary. They both have Iranian rep, and I'm very proud of them both, because I certainly never saw Iranian American main characters in the books I was reading when I grew up.
Yeah, and I wrote this down and then left it out of the introduction. But I was looking at both of your websites today, getting all the latest details. And I loved that you said that your focus is young adult fiction that centers Iranian American experience, because of not seeing that in books when you were growing up.
Everybody growing up in the young adult fiction. It wasn't even called young adult back in the day.
No.
But the teen books that I read.
You're gonna date us, don't do
I'm not dating. Everybody was presumptively, white and straight. And I just really didn't even think about it. I didn't think about the fact that I didn't see myself reflected in those books until I wrote Jasmine Zumide, and then just thought, oh, wow, how fun it is to see someone who looked like me and had my experience and my relatives and my identity. So yeah, I think that's important. And I hope that a lot of the themes, in both books are universal. About like The Search for Us is very much about found family, what constitutes a family. Like I said, when Henry and Samira first meet, they're siblings, but they're also perfect strangers. So the book is really about their journey towards getting to know one another as they go on this roller coaster ride of looking for their biological father.
Thank you. That's nice and a good summary. And I'm gonna put a pin in that and jump over to Maya because I have some questions about that for you a little bit more in a minute. But I want to jump over to Maya and have you introduce your first. Let's start with the latest book, but actually you could probably just talk about both of them because they're a series and they're so closely tied to each other. If you want to just share about both of them at the same time, that would be lovely.
Yeah. My first book was called Drizzle Dreams and Love Struck Things. It's here on one side of me, and Wild Wishes and Windswept Kisses is on the other side. They're both about 4 Indian American sisters. So kind of, if you love Little Women, you might enjoy this young adult series about 4 sisters, falling in love and coming of age. The first book it takes place over the course of a year, and it's almost like 4 novellas actually, because each season of the year kind of spotlights a different sister, and it's their point of view and their story as they meet someone new and as they explore new problems that they're coming up with. So that was the first book that came out a year ago, and it's wild to think that it was a year ago that we were all talking together too. And
it is. I know. I was like,
and then a few weeks ago, Wild Wishes came out, and that so the first book is a lot of first kisses and new relationships, and Wild Wishes I wanted to focus on kind of what happens after that first kiss when the parts of your relationship get hard. You've been together for a while, and it's not just like, ooh, we're together, and it's not just pure bliss anymore. You have to actually work on the relationship. And so in this book, things get a little bit harder. Some of the couples break up, some of the couples hit a rough patch, and but I also had a lot of fun with it. And it's also in some ways the opposite of Drizzle Dreams because it takes place all in one day. And I interwove the points of view in this one. So in one day, the eldest sister Nidhi is coming back. She went over the summer. She went to India. She's traveling back, but she's experiencing all these like travel delays. But while she's on her way home, she runs into her kind of sort of ex, and they were never official, but he was kind of the love interest in the first one. And so things kind of rekindle there. And then another sister, Sarisha, she's experienced a breakup, and she's I'm feeling really vulnerable and not sure if she wants to get into anything again, and she gets invited to this murder mystery role-playing party, and she has to put herself out there in a way that she's usually not very comfortable with, but then she gets really into it. Avani is another sister. I'll go through all the sisters.
Yeah, that's good.
Another sister who she's been with her boyfriend Fernando, since the first book, and they've been doing great. But suddenly it's senior year, and she realizes she has to apply to colleges. She's like worried that now, like suddenly she has to decide the rest of her life and who she wants to be, and she's feeling really stressed out about it. And some of that stress is coming into her relationship with Fernando as well. So they sign up for this dance workshop that day that they're hoping is going to, help them get back in sync with each other. And then the last sister, Ronnie, she's always believed in this like Bollywood romance, like epic romance. She wants it all. She wants the eternal romance, to fall in her lap. And she thinks it's happened with this guy, Raj, that she met in the first book. But then she also decides that she's going to tell the story of how they got together via a short film. And so she's doing this short film competition, which she wrote, and she's directing it. And she's got this cast, from friends from school who are also going to be in this one-day competition where they're shooting the short film in one day. And her boyfriend Raj is supposed to be their cameraman, and he doesn't show up. And so the whole day she's trying to win this competition, but she's also wondering where he is and what's going on. So those are kind of some of the conflicts that happen in the second book. But they're both very cozy books. They're both, about in the first book, it's about all 4 seasons. The second book, it's very November windy day.
Yeah.
And, I think they're a lot of fun.
Yeah. so as you're telling about all the different sisters, and one of the things that I was really curious about is when, as a writer, when you are telling a story from that many different points of view, like in the first one, you arranged it by season, and each sister gets a season, and I mean those feel like four little mini books within a bigger book, which to me as a writer feels easier. And then I was going through the second one today thinking like it's all working fine, but how on earth did you keep track? Because the other thing that you do is, at least with, is it Nindy? Is that how you pronounce the oldest sister's name?
Maybe.
She also is doing some like memories of her trip to India.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, like from a practical point of view as a writer, like how did you keep track of all that, and think about how you were going to weave that all together so that it's almost like braiding in a way, like you don't want to lose one strand, you don't want one sister's voice to be so much more like out there than another, so that you know one sister doesn't feel like a way stronger character than another. And that's a lot to manage. How did you do you have like physical reminder things, or how does that work for you as a writer?
I would say yes, that was kind of the hardest part of the novel, was making the transitions between them and keeping the pacing flowing, that you're into all their stories. It was definitely hard to do that. But I actually originally wrote like my outline the same way I wrote it with Drizzle. Is I wrote each sister story as their own outline first, and then but my editors really wanted to not do the four separate stories.
Yeah,
they were
yeah.
like, you know, by the second book, people are gonna have their favorite sister, and they don't want to wait like, you know, half the novel to get to
That's fair. Yeah.
and I was like, okay, good point. So I think people will have their favorite sister that they want to read about. So I just took those four outlines and then I started weaving them together as best I could. But in the first early draft, I got a lot of complaints from my beta readers about the pacing. So that was something that I was just working on every single draft, you know, forward. Every set of edits, I was just trying to like make that pacing work. So hopefully it came out okay.
Yeah, no, I mean, I was just like picking through, like trying to think about what I wanted to talk to you about. And yeah, no, I worked fine, but like just from my own writing experience, which admittedly is nonfiction and not fiction, but still I was just kind of like, oh my gosh, like how do you,
It's
okay, I
definitely
leave this
but I
one
respect
thing
those other writers who
yeah,
6 or 7 points of view, and they're either, you know, they're interweaving all of those. So.
yeah, and you have to be able to trust that you left it in a spot that the reader can then pick back up. Like there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you
And
did
I wanted
good.
to, one of my beta readers, you know, pointed out that like there were certain transitions that work really well. You know, like if you can weave a theme in at the end of a chapter with one sister that goes into the next chapter,
Yeah,
that is one way that can help. So I tried to do that where I could.
yeah, that's just a lot. So did you have kind of keep it all in your head and just kind of work with it as you went, or did you have to resort to like sticky notes on the wall to figure out who was doing what when?
Well, I'm very digital, so I use Scrivener, which I love, and you
Gotcha.
can drag and drop
Yeah.
scenes and move them around as you want, which I think is super helpful for this kind of thing. I definitely
Yeah. So I'm going to jump over to Susan. Like, when you are writing, do you have like what's your process for when you're like keeping track of characters and who's doing what when, and when you're going to do different things? Is because you know I that's one thing that really fascinates me about talking to different writers, is that we all do it different ways. And some people like have to have like a very external organization, and some people feel better just kind of keeping it all in. So I'm always curious how people go about it.
So I kind of do two things. I come from a screenwriting background, and so I tend to think in terms of acts and kind of the tent poles. But before I even start that, I have my concept, which is brother and sister who have never met, joined together to find the father they never knew. And I kind of go, what is the story about? What's it like really about? That's what it's about on the surface. What is it? What's kind of really the theme of it? And one of the characters says, and I think this emerges as the theme, is that absent parents are still very much present in our lives. So Henry and Samira begin the book thinking, we have no connection to our bio dad. That doesn't bother us at all. We're fine with it. But you can really clearly see that it's a very painful wound. And I really like a book called Story Genius that kind of really helps you, hammer down that kind of third rail of what is the meaning of sort of what's happening on the surface. And then I jumped to my screenwriting background for looking, just very generally speaking, what's the beginning, the middle, and the end. And of course, that big old second act is broken into two. There's a great book called Story by Bob McKee, but Save the Cat kind of took all of his 700 pages and distilled it down into a worksheet. So I am a fan of that narrative structure. I'll kind of answer all those questions, get all those tent poles going, and then sort of dropping scenes. I go, this is a first act scene. This is a second act. This is the second half of the second act, type of scene. And mine is dual point of view. It's Henry and Samira. And so I think it was in Maya's second book, the sisters are all apart. So that was probably a lot of juggling. But for me, Henry and Samira, their stories are very connected. In the beginning, they're on sort of parallel tracks until they literally get connected. And then it's like alternating chapters deciding, okay, whose point of view do we want to be in for this chapter? How would it be more powerful? Some chapters I want from each of their points of view. I want to see how they, interpreted the events differently. So I like to think of my kind of like a roadmap. I know what my destination is. I know my major turning points along the way. And then I give myself permission to just go off on lots of little side roads and tangents and dead ends and, figure out what's working and whatnot. But this is the first male point of view I've ever written. And it was helpful. My husband was a very helpful advisor. A guy. Okay. And Henry plays hockey. My husband played hockey. So I got some input from my husband, but it was fun writing a male point of view.
No, I just had a conversation with another local author who she writes mystery, and she has a series out now that has her first male protagonist. So we were talking a little bit about that too. That it is a little bit different, and you can't necessarily assume that the way you think about something would be the way somebody else would. I mean, that's true of anything, but I think it does change a little bit when it's a different gender of a character. So
great.
Maya, do you have anything else that you tend to do when you're writing, and not just for these books, but just in general, that helps you like keep storylines in your head, plots in your head, or that kind of thing?
Well, I agree with Susan that I think it's important to know kind of the character's growth arc and their internal growth, as well as like the external story that you're trying to tell, and like themes. So I think with Wild Wishes, my theme had to do with kind of the ephemeral nature of relationships and how they can change and grow, and that's okay. And even if you break up with someone, that's okay too. Your life isn't over. I think that's really important for teens to know, especially because there are all these stories that are about teens getting together with like the one who's their soulmate or whatever, which sometimes happens. People sometimes have really long relationships with their teen sweethearts, but not everyone does. So I just want them to feel okay about moving on. I think that's a perfectly reasonable thing to do.
Yeah. So that actually segues into something that I've been thinking about a lot, and we were actually just talking about at the bookstore today, is you're both writing YA, and I'm always interested to see what people think, because of course there's going to be slightly different thoughts about this again for every different person writing YA, for every different person like selling YA in a bookstore or shelving YA in a library. That what do you feel like constitutes YA, and when does it like cross a line into not becoming YA anymore. It's just an interesting conversation that's going on in the book community too, of since there's so many adults, reading YA, are we pushing it older and stuff? And I'm just curious from your perspective when you sit down, particularly for you, Maya, because you do write middle grade and YA, like what for you makes that a YA book?
Yeah. I think that's a good question. And yes, there has been a lot of discussion of, the way that adults are reading, consuming YA, and that's changing the market of what sells, and maybe making it so that younger YA is less, it's harder for publishers to sell as many younger YA books, so then they don't invest in them as much. I do consider, especially the first one, Drizzle Dreams and Love Struck Things, to be a younger YA. It's very much first kisses. It's very innocent. There's not a whole lot of heavy conflict, or it's not gritty at all. And neither book is gritty really, but it feels like something that can work for a middle schooler who wants to like start reading YA. So I think that space is important because there are kids who need those books and they're not ready for these like grittier,
right.
And then some teens are going to have, their life reflects something that's different, and they have a lot more going on in their life than maybe some other kids. So I think we need both kinds of books.
Yeah.
But I do worry about how adults are changing it. But going back to what you're saying of what it means to be YA, I think pacing and voice are a huge part of it. I think sinking into those teenage emotions are a huge part of it, and trying to remember how you felt like and how everything felt so big and important, even if it was small. It was small to an adult, but it wasn't small to you. It kind of shapes you. Like small moments, can have a big impact on the rest of your life, because this is a time of your life where your brain is, suddenly trying to figure out who you are, and it's just very intense. So I think all of that goes into what is YA.
Do you have thoughts about that, Susan? Because I have.
Oh yeah,
having gone through both of your books, building
on what Maya said, I definitely agree. Of course, it's point of view, making sure that you're kind of dropping yourself into that teenage, body of, as Maya said, something to an adult that might seem small feels much bigger when you're a teen. Your world is a little bit smaller. You don't have children. You don't have, parents who need your support. You're not really thinking about like politics in the world. Like your world is your friend group and, maybe your boyfriend. And I do Search for Us certainly has heavier themes. I love this quote that the theater director of my son's school used to say with her actors and their teen actors, which is like, they're just like adults, but with braces. So my themes are pretty sophisticated. The Search for Us, Samira's brother, Cameron, is struggling with alcohol addiction. She's assumed a lot of responsibility for him. Even in terms of their search for their biological father, there's, obviously like trauma in their respective families. And so I think it's point of view, and I think it's just trying to stay relevant to today's teens. Making sure that we don't get judgy as adult authors. We don't get judgy about our teen characters. Jasmine Zumide certainly is very, very, very messy. She makes a lot of mistakes. And I think, like Maya said, capturing voice, which, is not always easy. I think both of us kind of stay away from like heavy jargon, which can kind of get dated. But I love writing young adult. I love writing young adult books. I happen to be, I'm proud of the fact that I feel like my books have a crossover appeal, but I totally hear you on like our adults sort of cannibalizing and, taking over YA to where it's less and less relevant to actual teens.
Well, and I went into that question like having grabbed your books off the shelves today as I was sitting down and thinking about it. And I mean, I read pages from your books and chapters from your books, and they still feel like teenagers, if that makes sense. Like, again, for sure, like oh my gosh, this is the big huge deal, everything's a big deal in Wild Wishes, where it's like, this is going to matter for the rest of our lives. And one of the things that comes to mind when I think about The Search for Us is like her, well, she's not going to go to college, and her making the big speech to defer her enrollment, and the enrollment lady is like, well, yeah, that's fine. She's not gotten all the courage up to make this big speech. So it just feels to me, for both of yours, that whether it's lighter or whether it's harder themes, they both really ring true to the teen voice. And I guess for me, that's the thing, is, does it tackle things that are relevant to that group of people? And does it ring true how they're reacting and the kinds of things they're talking about and how they're processing the world and that kind of thing? Or does it just feel like we've created teenagers as the characters and put adult stuff in them,
Well, I would be
or whatever? And so
I'd be curious to hear what Maya says. Like, for me, my mother struggled with alcohol addiction, and I assumed a lot of responsibility for her. So I was really tapping into my teenage self. How did I feel about that? How did I respond? Well, I just kept trying more desperately to control things. And it was important to me to include this storyline because when I was Samira's age, I felt so alone. I just felt so alone. I felt so much shame around it. I just thought, no one else is experiencing this except me, which of course is just patently untrue, but there was no social media or anything at that time. There were not TikTok videos that I could have watched about here's how to grapple with your family member. And so, Maya, I'm curious to know if you drew on like some of your own romantic experiences in writing.
I wouldn't say that I drew on my own romantic experiences, but I think with their personalities, definitely, there are little bits of me in all of them. Sarisha sometimes, can get lost in her art and doesn't, feels like she doesn't understand other people. She can be inarticulate at times. Nidhi is kind of like similar to your character in The Search for Us, where she is kind of the overfunctioner and she's controlling at times and things like that. And I feel like there's this like really practical side of me. It's really funny, but I feel like each of sister, no matter how different they are, there are parts of them in me. And then Avani is the one that's like sometimes accused of being a flake, but I really, so another part of the book is that Avani is thinking in the second book that she might have ADHD. And as an adult, I've been starting to think that as well for myself. And I haven't gotten diagnosed. So, but I just started to think that based on what other people told me and, things I've read on the internet. And so some of that was reflected in Avni's story. So yeah.
I saw that. I was like, oh, yay.
Myself.
So yeah, that was interesting to me just because I'm a late diagnosed ADHD, like adult diagnosed. Yeah, just
there's so many. I don't think when we were younger people got diagnosed.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting because a lot of people get diagnosed after their kids do, and which is my case. It was like, oh, hey,
like those
seems familiar. So, but yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting. You made the comment about social media, and like we all talk about, there's all this stuff in the media about how terrible social media is for kids and all this stuff, but really there's also a good side of it, of, oh hey, I'm not the only one. And growing up, we didn't have anything like that. We were just like, we must be the only ones who've ever felt this way. And that's another teen thing, right? And I think even up into your early adulthood of thinking that you're the only ones who's ever experienced this and that kind of thing. So But yeah, no, I think that's one of the things I was going to ask you, Susan, because your book deals with things that are really hard. How do you, when you're sitting there with themes that you know are going to be challenging, how do you, for a YA audience, how do you like not diminish it or dumb it down, but also balance the heaviness of it when you're writing a book that you want kids to also read for fun? How do you think about that when you are working on a book like that?
I try to inject as much humor as I can. I try to always put like a comic turn at the end of like a heavy scene, not comic, but like a lighthearted. I try to like release the tension. And I think I just endeavor to make it, you know, really true. I want this to like resonate as true, whether you've had this personal experience or not. So I try to add like a lighthearted dimension, even to like very difficult scenes. And honestly, I just, you know, I trust that the teen, again, my book is definitely, The Search for Us is for a more mature teen reader. It's not, you know, for like a 12-year-old maybe. But I trust that they'll come along with me, and that this might not have anything to do with their personal experience, but it might just be a fascinating glimpse into characters with lives that are very different, that are experiencing something very different. But I also try to make the theme universal. So again, absent parents, that's, you know, in some regards, my mom was absent because she wasn't present when she'd been drinking a lot. And I love her so much, and she's not here anymore. And that was not the sum total of her, but it was, you know, the kind of just omnipresent circumstance of my childhood. So yeah, it's as I said, I think my main strategy is to leaven the heaviness with lighter moments injected throughout.
Yeah. Well, what I found interesting too is I mean, I think you're probably right that it's not a 12-year-old's book, but it's still like, I think a 13, 14, 15-year-old could read it.
Absolutely.
There's so much redemption and hope and you know, like it didn't read so old that somebody like in the younger high school could still come in and read
Sometimes
it.
I think maybe something that feels older, maybe there's like a cynicism to it. Maybe there's kind of like an edge, and there's not cynicism.
Yeah, exactly.
There's a lot of
hard, but not in a way that feels hopeless, I guess. So
absolutely right, exactly.
Yeah. So I wanted to jump back, Maya, and ask you if you want to talk about your middle grade a little bit, because you have a different series out that looks really cool.
I do. So these are move over a little bit, and here are the covers. They Dolphin have Battles of Superstorms, and They Dolphin have Swims with Sea Dragons. So this is actually for elementary school age kids, so around like 6 to 9 years. And it's science adventure. So if they like Magic School Bus, they would probably like these. The first book.
Yay!
Yeah. So I was inspired by Magic School Bus for sure. The first book is about Sejal and her family are celebrating Diwali, which is right this weekend. So,
yeah, I was gonna say it's coming right up.
Yeah, so it's coming up this weekend, but it's also hurricane season in the fall, and there's a hurricane warning on the news. I live in the Pacific Northwest, so I actually don't experience this, but I chose to make it about hurricanes. So there's a hurricane warning on the news, and she's worried that it's going to ruin her family celebration, which is really important to her, not just because it's a holiday that she loves, but also because she's been feeling kind of distant from her cousin, who's a little older than her, and she feels like her cousin is growing up faster than her and doesn't like all the things that she does, including like imagination and playing with stuffed animals and things like that. But Sejal has a big imagination, and she can turn her cardboard box into anything she wants. So she turns it into a hurricane hunting aircraft, and she and her cousin and her favorite stuffed animal and her little brother and her puppy all climb into this cardboard box / hurricane hunting aircraft, and they fly into a hurricane to learn about the science of hurricanes. And it's based a lot on real hurricane facts. So there, we do actually have hurricane hunters who fly into hurricanes to gather data about hurricanes. And then she's trying to figure out how to stop the hurricane. And so I talk about this project that happened in the 1960s. It's a real government project where they would fly aircraft into hurricanes again, but they were emitting chemicals that were meant to change the hurricane and hopefully weaken the hurricane. So I talk about that project, and then, but ultimately that project didn't prove to work. But then Sejal, based on science, comes up with her own idea of how she might stop the hurricane.
That's very cool.
Yeah. So
I love the idea of an updated multicultural magic school bus is very awesome.
Yeah. So it was definitely fun. And the second one is about marine life. So they go into the ocean and they learn about hydrothermal vents that are deep within the ocean. And there's like all these critters that live around these hydrothermal vents, and they get their energy from the hydrothermal vent rather than the sun, like most of the planet.
Yeah. Very cool. And is the second one out yet, or is it coming out?
It's already out. They came out just a week before Wild Wishes. So
okay.
Busy.
I thought it was fairly new.
Yeah, and then the third one is coming out in January, and that one
cool.
Sadelson dives for diamonds on Neptune, and it's about a real scientific theory that it rains diamonds on Neptune.
Ooh, that's super cool. So how did you come to write such wildly different like, because you have a YA series that's like Little Women, and then you have a STEM series for younger kids. I'm just curious how that all came about.
Well, I think Drizzle Dreams came from my own love of YA, and that's just like a period in my life that I feel like I always come back to, and I just love reading YA books, and I think coming of age stories are really interesting because that's when you're figuring out who you are. But meanwhile, I also had a kid, and my kid was starting to read chapter books, and I had trouble finding, actually at that time, my kid was in kindergarten at the time when I started writing this series, and I was having trouble finding a lot of diverse chapter books at that time, because there had been a lot more in YA and picture books, but chapter books were still kind of coming.
That's a really good point. I hadn't really thought about that, but now my brain's kind of whirring around going, I don't think we have a whole lot. So
there are more now. They're coming out now, I think, because around the same time other people started to realize this too. But that was part of the impetus. And then also just based on my kid and watching my kid like play with cardboard boxes, I got the idea. And it was also my kid who gave me the first science fact that it rains diamonds on Neptune. My kid was like, Mom, does it really rain diamonds on Neptune? And I was like, I've never heard that. Let me
let's find out.
So I Googled it, and I was like, oh yeah, there is a whole like theory about that. So that all of those things kind of combined to create this series.
That's cool. So you've got another one in that series coming up in January, you said?
January, yeah.
And then do you have more after that?
After that, I don't know. After that is
okay. That's okay.
Up in the air.
Yeah, it's like I think the writing world is interesting because I think it's really common to have like a flurry, where a whole bunch of books come out at once, and then a pause, and then a flurry, and then a pause.
Because I think, so like, for example, with Sejal Sinha books, they bought it in a 3-book series, and I think they want to wait and see how it does before they decide to extend the series. Yeah. And I think that's part of the reason why there are these pauses, is that you'll get and then I think Susan and I both had 2-book deals for our YAs, and so that's why they came out one year after another. But then to decide if our publisher wants to do more books with us, they want to see how the
sales are. Yeah. Well, and I think the other thing that's interesting is that just that sort of life as a like the writing of a book is so much different than the marketing and the support and the visits and the interviews and the this and that all takes away from the writing. So it's almost like you have this big push and then you have writing time again. And so then the next round of books comes out. And but it's always interesting to me how some people will go along and it's like one a year, especially particularly like a mystery series writer or something that's established. But I think for most of us, it ends up being kind of this little bit of roller coastery ride up and down. So do you have anything else, Susan, that's coming out? Are you working on anything that you can talk about, or you just
I am pivoting to the adult world.
Oh, very cool.
I just finished a manuscript, kind of a provocative adult book that we will be looking for a publisher early next year. So yeah, I kind of felt like a lot of the themes and subject matter that I want to explore really can only be explored through adult books. So I hope to come back to the young adult age category again, but for the moment, I'm pivoting in this direction and we'll see how
That's awesome.
Fingers
Yay.
crossed. Yeah.
Good. That's exciting. No, I think it's fun to like once you've done it, one thing to kind of go, oh, well, what happens if I do this? And so, yeah, that's exciting. I'm happy for you.
Thank
Do
you.
you have, do either of you have any books that you've read recently that you really enjoyed?
Well, I can recommend one, especially for everything that's happening in the world right now. And he happens to be my blurb cover author. It's called The Life and Crimes of Hoodie Rosen, and it's by Isaac Blum. And it's about a student in, I want to say a yeshiva school, I believe it's a yeshiva school in Brooklyn, in a neighborhood in which a big influx of Jewish folks have moved in, and there's some like backlash and prejudice, and it's hilarious, it's profound, it's shocking. It was nominated for a National Book Award. It won the Morris Award for the best debut novel. And I loved it. When I read it, I read an early copy and I said, this feels like an instant classic, and it's kind of become an instant classic. And again, in particular with everything that's happening right now, The Life and Crimes of Hoodie Rosen by Isaac Blum.
How do you spell the person's name in the title?
Hoodie, Hoodie,
Okay.
Rosen. Yeah, Rosen. Yeah.
Okay.
It's so funny. It's just so funny and so
we'll
profound.
put that in the comments when I
Please.
upload everything so that people can see it. Do you have anything that you've read recently, Maya, that you really liked?
Well, one of my critique partners' books came out today, actually. It's called Gorgeous Gruesome Faces, and it's kind of an Asian pop queer horror. And I read a very early version of it like a couple of years ago, so I'm very excited to read the new final version. But I think
Gorgeous Gruesome Faces, you said?
Yeah.
And who's the author?
Linda Chang.
Okay.
Cheng.
That's a great title.
Yeah, I'm like, well, that makes me want to go check it out. All right, so we'll put both of those comments. And let's see. The other random thing I was thinking about is I should start asking people, like, is there anything fun that you like to do that's not writing related? Like that, you're just like, I can't stand this anymore. I got to go do something else. Do you have other hobbies or things that just kind of let you? Well, I should like, I'm reworking this in my head as we talk. Is there something that you do for fun that also feels regenerative? When you're working on a book and you're like, you need to pivot to something that keeps the creative energy going in the back of your head, but you're not trying to think about it consciously. Do you have like for me, like knitting or crocheting often is that because I'm having to focus on what I'm doing, but I'm also like making something, and so I can still kind of work on something in the back of my mind. Do you have, either of you have something that you like to do that does that for you?
I definitely like to get outdoors. So I like to hike, or if I don't have time for a whole hike, I take my dog for a walk. I like kayaking when the weather is better than it is right now.
Yeah, it's not in November.
Anything I can do outdoors, I think just helps like reset me and get me away from screens and social media and things like that.
And I live here in the desert, and there's, in my opinion, nothing more beautiful than the desert sky at night. And so I go for a sunset swim every night. I go for a swim sometime between 5 and 6 o'clock. And just like you said, Christy, I get blocked. It's like I just can't figure out my way forward in the book or the chapter or the paragraph. And as soon as I get in the pool, it comes to me. It's just like, as soon as, like you said, you're not thinking about it directly, it can just be processing in a background window. It's like, that's the solution.
Yeah.
So it's so replenishing to me to be out, like the palms are kind of silhouetted against, and a sort of orange ombre sky. Yeah, it's just beautiful. And then the pool lights come on, and that totally reminds me of my childhood, because we had a pool. This was the best thing when the pool lights come on.
That's very cool. Because you're in Southern California, right?
Yes, I'm in the desert.
So,
I'm in like the Palm Springs. So yeah, today was like 83, it's like it's not winter. I
know. No, totally kidding. I actually really like this weather. I was driving to work this morning, and what we've been having lately is that we're getting tons and tons of rain, but we're having these, I don't know if you guys up there, because I know Puget Sound, sometimes it's a little mistier than it is down here. We tend to have things kind of flow through and then flow through again, but they don't just sit over us. But we've been having a lot the last few days where it'll be gorgeous for like a little bit of the day. So we're still getting tons of rain, but we'll get this break. And today it was this morning when I left, and the sun was shining through, all the leaves are changing color, and it was just like, oh my gosh, this is so pretty.
We have been basically getting that same thing, is like some like really strong downpours, but then also like it's kind of strangely warm sometimes. So
us too.
And like sunny suddenly. So it's hard to know what to wear, but it's
I know.
Nice. And then I have noticed that now my neighborhood is just so colorful with the leaves.
Yeah, that's so cool. Well, I am gonna just tell everybody what's coming up next and at the store, and then if you all wouldn't mind sharing in a couple minutes where we can find you on social media. But first of all, just to let everybody know, we will be talking to Vikram Madan and Chrissy Krebs next week. I'm gonna have to talk to him about the correct pronunciation of his last name, because I'm not totally sure. But they are both children's writers. Vikram writes the Zuni Tales, Zoomy Tales. Anyway, cute, very cute little kid graphic novels that are adorable. And then Chrissy has kind of an illustrated novels about, the one we have in the store is about a bear who gets a unicorn horn that can grant wishes. So it's going to be a fun conversation because they're both kind of fun and silly, and I'm excited. Our book club for Cozy Mysteries meets next Tuesday at 4 p.m., which is a change from the last few. Just note that it's a couple hours later if you're going to attend. They are reading Dairy Quite Contrary with a cute little dog on the front. So look for it in the store. We are also doing our sci-fi fantasy book club next week, and I'm going to scoot behind me because I've got the book here. We are reading Soul Jar, which is a collection of sci-fi fantasy stories that center disability, and it's edited by Annie Carl, who's a bookseller up north of us in Washington. We are going to actually do that virtually this time. So next Wednesday at 7 o'clock, we're going to try to do that virtually. So hopefully more people will just be able to jump on and attend rather than having to drive into the store. Also, our holiday catalog has launched, which I'm not quite sure how it's possible that I'm saying that already, but you can pop in the store and get your copy. And yeah, so that's what's coming up. We are going to have a visiting artist in the store in December. Sue Clancy is going to spend the day with us, so be looking for details about that. And finally, thank you so much, Maya and Susan. Can you both share, if you are on social media, where people can find you?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you, Christy, for having us. It's so fun to come back after a year and be able to talk again. And I really appreciate your support. My website is mayaprasad.com, and my handle, I'm on Instagram, TikTok, and Threads now is getting kind of
so I haven't dived into that one.
And it's Ms. Maya Prasad, MS Maya Prasad. Yeah.
And I am on same thing, Instagram, TikTok, and Threads at Susan Azim Boyer. So that's SusanAzimBoyer. And I'm on that other bird app that got updated. It's my handle's a little different. It's at Susan Jenna. And it's funny because I also grabbed the Susan Azim Boyer account, but it's not my official account because I, had been building my following on that other platform for quite a while. So, and my website is susanazimboyer.com.
Yay.
And also thank you, Christy, so much for having us.
You're welcome. This
always
is very fun.
With Maya. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, both of you. And like we said at the beginning, we've got both of their books in the store right now. So if you are interested, please stop by and grab a copy. And thank you so much. Have a good night, and we'll talk to you next time.